We are literally just one day away now from the opening ceremony of the Candidates Chess 2022. So the players are in Madrid, they're ready and raring to go. And the man I'm following most closely here is the one and only Alireza Firouzja. Now yesterday I was considering what he might play against 1e4. I opted for the Sicilian, but who knows, could be e5, could be a Caro-Kann. Today I'm thinking about what he might play against 1d4, and this one's really tough. Because if we look, for example, at the Superbet Chess Classic, which he just played in Romania, well there he played a Queen's Gambit declined, a Nimzo Indian, a Slav, and two King's Indian defences. Now he may have been holding some preparation back, I'm sure he was. What I'm going to guess here is that he'll probably play a Nimzo or maybe something going back into the Queen's Gambit decline, depending on whether white goes knight to c3, knight f3. But for this game here, I want to have some fun, pretend that he'll play the King's Indian here, because this is a defence which he's been playing since he was a kid. He loves the dynamic imbalance, it's so aggressive, gives chances. So I'm looking at a fun game here that he played with the King's Indian defence. Now this was against David Anton Guerrero, and this guy, I swear he always just beats this guy. He's really got his number. This guy also looks like Fabi, I thought, as well, like a Spanish chess brother of Fabi's. They're very similar looking, same hairstyle and everything. Anyway, David had white here. He was playing against Alireza in this skiing open. This is rapid play, and he kicked off with pawn to d4. Alireza went knight f6. We had c4, g6, knight to c3, bishop g7, and white steps up the big centre. This is the classic King's Indian space grab, and now d6 from Alireza, and here white goes pawn to h3. And this is the so-called Makoganov variation, very trendy lately. White's actually preparing aggressive ideas of pawn to g4 and trying to fight fire with fire here. Black's often going f5, so white wants to play against that, also play on the king side, attack black's king. And I was just highlighting that castles is the main move here, but Alireza goes his own way already, sticks the knight on d7. We had bishop to e3 developing, and now e5, the classic break in the centre. It prompts d5 to be played, and now you've gained access to this c5 square. So the knight hit that square, pressures e4. White doesn't really want to cede the bishop pair so soon, and I feel queen c2 was slightly more accurate here, holding that pawn. f3 was played instead, although immediately Alireza can go knight to h5, start looking at this dark square. So the knight came to e2 to cover. Castles from black now, queen d2 developing, and Alireza wastes no time. He strikes in the centre with f5, putting pressure on e4, but a really nice response now from white. We had takes on f5, pawn recaptures. Why has white ceded the centre, given black these lovely pawns? Well, now g4 is played. Excellent move. And white's actually trying to gain access to this e4 square for the knight, maybe some other pieces later on. And so you're forcing this pawn to actually leave the defence of that square. So Alireza carries on here, knight into f4. And this is a very common idea in the King's Indian. You're actually willing to give a pawn here if white wants to take that, simply to open up this bishop, try and turn it into a monster. So instead of capturing, white just castled here. Really good move. Alireza now jumps in here with check. That's the downside of castling. The knight gets quite aggressive, but actually this is kind of pseudo-aggressive, because after king to b1, Alireza now goes pawn f4, seizing more space, but he's already actually worse here in this position, for the positional reason that after bishop takes on c5, knight takes back, now b4 comes, and actually you're kicking that knight, then this one's got access to e4, and these pawns are coming quite nicely. White is quite for choice here. It's hard for the black pieces to develop. So Alireza retreated the knight back, or did he? So in this position here, he leaves the knight on c5. He recognises the danger, and he just plays pawn to e4. Now, clearly, as you can see on the surface of it, this isn't a great position for black. You're now losing a piece, which white takes. Yes, you get e3, grabbing some space, kicking the queen, but I mean, white's just a piece up here. This is a very speculative attack, but classic King's Indian. You might be worse, but you look for chances. So now Alireza takes on c5 here. The knight hits e4, targets that pawn, and once again, Alireza plays actively here. He knows he can't start doing things like pawn to b6, so he plays pawn c6 here, and now if the knight takes, you can go queen b6 check, the knight hops back, and then a5. Now actually white can play like this. You can start going c5 for example, but okay, it's quite hard to calculate all this. It looks dangerous. So instead of taking that pawn on c5, white just brought another piece into the game, and now Alireza developed the queen anyway, adds pressure on the dark squares, and here white goes a bit wrong really. This pawn's actually a passed pawn if you kick it onto d6. Now you're about to trap the bishop, so this one would probably come to d7. Then you can go bishop e2, leave that d file open, and even if black starts going rook to b8, trying to go b5, well, you can actually start attacking on the king side, because this is never really a threat. If you push b5, well, you can capture that one, and you can't actually take back with the rook. Keep the b file open, because there's two minor pieces covering that square. So pawn takes, knight takes on c5 now. This is the problem. The queen's no longer holding that pawn, and even if you check now, well, the queen can block with a counter check against the king. These are coming off, completely winning for white. So basically white just had to play a bit more patiently here, use that passed d pawn, but instead of doing any of that, bishop to d3 was played, but it now blocks in that rook, and Alireza pounces. He goes rook to b8 here, preparing that b pawn push, and queen to b3 was played. Again, a bit of an ugly move, steps onto that b file. There could be some threats here, but Alireza just sidesteps now with king to h8. So we had takes on c6 now. You can't recapture, or then you lose your rook down here. So instead Alireza developed the bishop, connected these rooks, and now again, if you take this pawn as white, well then rook f7, you're winning the pawn back, and there's a lot of pressure down the b file. You don't want to be opening lines, so that's why pawn c7 was played, to try and keep that b file closed. So the queen captured that one. Now this queen came to a3, targeting c5, coming off the b line, and Alireza just drops his bishop back here, because actually the pawn is immune. I mean, say you take with the queen, well then you can recapture, knight takes, and now you've left the defense of this one, so you capture it with the bishop here on c3. So that's why white didn't take the pawn on c5. Instead, bishop c2 was played, tucking back to help defend the king, open up the rook, but now Alireza gets going with pawn to b5. Now you don't want to start taking with the knight, then moves like bishop c4 could come, hitting that piece, a6 at the right moment. So the pawn captured instead, and now Alireza follows up with a6 anyway. The whole purpose of his play here is just to rip open lines against the king. So the pawn can't capture, it's pinned. You don't really want to let black take there and kick on. So the queen actually captured that pawn, and now Alireza comes to a8 with the rook. This is his whole idea, and there's only one move in the game here that doesn't lose on the spot basically. If you want to pause and look for it, then please do so. So the way for white to play here was actually to counter-attack against the black queen. These counter-attack moves are some of the trickiest to spot, because your first instinct is to actually move the attacked piece or block it or take or something like that. So this was the way to go. It stays very tactical, but white's doing okay. But after the queen came to c6, looks so logical. The problem with this now is you're not forced to trade. You can actually whip that queen away into a5, and now it's attacking down here, looking to check on b4 as well. So this one's also pressured by the bishop, so that's why a4 came, blocking that line. If, by the way, you go bishop b3 here, well then you can just take, pawn recaptures, take on c3, you're actually winning a piece, plus there's a mating attack to follow down here. So that's why the bishop didn't come to b3 blocking, instead a4 played, but now queen b4 check. You know, there's a real vacuum around the king here, and it's actually mate on the way now. You can't stop it as white. So the king came to c1, queen a3 check, and this pawn does a great job of boxing in the king. So it came back to b1, bishop a2 check played. If you take that one with the knight, well then we're actually checkmating on b2 using this monster King's Indian bishop. And after the king came to a1, well now Alireza took on c3 with check, knight captures, queen captures, and here white resigned. If you take the bishop here, well now we pick up on c2 with check, and wherever the king goes, now we crash through with the rook. This is actually mate. So watch out for the King's Indian defence. I can definitely see Alireza rolling it out if he's in a must-win situation. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see another epic Alireza game, click here. Thanks for watching. See you soon.